Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courtrooms. Those words would echo in Officer Martinez's mind for years to come. Judge Keisha Williams had just arrived at the courthouse, dressed in plain clothes, carrying a leather briefcase filled with case files for the day. She barely had time to reach the steps before Martinez stepped into her path. His face twisted with disgust. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in," he sneered. Before she could respond, Martinez's open palm cracked against her face, hard enough to whip her head to the side. Her briefcase flew from her hand, papers scattering like leaves in the wind. He grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the cold stone wall. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courtrooms," he repeated, twisting her arms behind her back and snapping the cuffs on so tight they bit into her skin. Other officers stood by, laughing, some pulling out phones to record the scene. Keisha's jaw throbbed with pain, but her eyes locked on the courthouse nameplate above the steps. The Honorable Judge K. Williams, presiding. 20 feet away from the courtroom, she ruled. She was being brutalized by the very system she served. Inside, Martinez adjusted his uniform, ran a hand over his hair, and put on his usual mask of control. He had done this before. Spin the story, frame the narrative, make himself the hero. The system almost always believed the cop over the accused, especially when the accused looked like her. "Your Honor," Martinez began, calm and confident, "I was conducting routine security protocols when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security." He gestured toward Keisha, now seated at the defendant's table in handcuffs, a purple bruise blooming across her cheek. "The defendant was acting erratically," Martinez continued smoothly, refusing to provide identification and becoming aggressive when asked to comply. Temporary Judge Harrison, a thin, pale man in his 60s, nodded thoughtfully. "And what exactly did you observe, Officer Martinez?" he asked. She was dressed inappropriately for court, carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents, Martinez said, voice growing more confident. "When I approached her, she became verbally abusive, using profanity and threatening me." In the gallery, Officers Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances. They had heard this exact story before, Martinez's go-to script whenever he roughed someone up. "She kept shouting about being someone important," Martinez added with a sneer. "These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid responsibility. I've seen this playbook 100 times. Judge Harrison leaned forward, curious. "Did she attempt to flee or resist arrest?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Martinez replied without hesitation. "She became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody. I used only the minimum force necessary to keep the courthouse safe." His voice was calm, but his hand trembled slightly as he spoke, the only sign of cracks in his performance. The stenographer's keys clicked rapidly, documenting every word. In the back row, a young law clerk frowned, something about this story nagging at her memory. "Officer Rodriguez," the prosecutor called. "Can you corroborate Martinez's testimony?" Rodriguez stood, uniform perfectly pressed. "Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire incident. The defendant was clearly trying to bypass security protocols. Officer Martinez handled the situation with professionalism. And the alleged assault?" Judge Harrison pressed. Martinez's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, the injuries she sustained were the result of her own resistance. I have partial video footage, though unfortunately, my body cam malfunctioned this morning." The lie rolled off his tongue effortlessly. Keisha finally spoke, her voice calm but laced with fire. "How convenient." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Nothing, Your Honor," she replied, leaning back. Martinez pushed forward, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "This is a classic case of someone trying to play the victim card after being caught breaking the law. She trespassed on government property, carried suspicious documents, and when confronted, immediately cried discrimination to deflect from her crimes." Prosecutor Sandra Walsh, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, nodded. Officer Martinez, in your 15 years of service, have you seen cases like this before? Far too many, he said solemnly. Certain individuals think they're above the law. They scream racism and brutality just to escape consequences. Several white courthouse employees nodded in agreement. They had heard similar stories on the news. It felt familiar, even comforting. Martinez gestured toward Kesha again. She claims she was going to work, he said, adding sarcastic air quotes, but she had no proof of employment, no ID, and no legitimate reason to be in a restricted area. Officer Thompson stepped forward. If I may add, Your Honor, she was carrying what looked like confidential legal documents. We suspect identity theft or fraud. Fraud? Judge Harrison looked intrigued. Yes, Martinez jumped in. These documents had case numbers, judicial letterhead. No civilian should have access to them. We believe she was planning to impersonate a court employee. The irony was almost unbearable. But Martinez pressed on, building his case, blind to the trap he was walking into. In my professional opinion, he said coldly, this is yet another attempt to turn a clear violation of the law into a race issue, a distraction from real crimes. She thought she could manipulate the public's sympathy. He turned, locking eyes with Kesha. People like her think they can walk into any building they want, scream discrimination, and get away with it. Not in my courthouse. The words hung heavy in the room. Some court staff shifted uncomfortably. Others sat stiff and silent. Your Honor, Prosecutor Walsh said, the state recommends charges for trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. Her attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue is a desperate defense strategy. Martinez allowed himself a thin, satisfied smile. Everything was going exactly the way he wanted. Another case, another victory, another reminder that the system always kept people in their place. Furthermore, Martinez continued, clearly emboldened by the courtroom's approving atmosphere, I want to emphasize that I showed remarkable restraint. The defendant was unstable, possibly under the influence of narcotics. A lesser officer might have used far more force. Judge Harrison nodded gravely. Your professionalism is noted, Officer Martinez. In the defendant's chair, Kesha sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap despite the cuffs cutting into her wrists. Her face was calm, almost serene, but if anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed the faintest curve of a smile tugging at her lips. She was memorizing everything, every lie, every exaggeration, every detail that would soon unravel this officer's career. Martinez had no idea he was testifying before the very person who could end him. Anything further, officer? Judge Harrison asked. Martinez straightened proudly. Only this, Your Honor. Incidents like today remind us why we need strong law enforcement. Some people only understand authority when it is backed by force. The defendant learned that actions have consequences. Those words would prove to be far more prophetic than he realized. The state rests its case, Prosecutor Walsh announced confidently. The evidence clearly demonstrates a pattern of criminal behavior and resistance to lawful authority. As Martinez stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Kesha's eye one last time and winked, a gesture of absolute dominance. As if the verdict were already guaranteed, it would be the final moment of victory in his entire career. The defendant may now make her statement, Judge Harrison said, his tone carrying the faint suggestion that this was a mere formality before sentencing. Kesha Williams rose slowly, the chains of her handcuffs clinking softly as she stood. The bruise on her cheek was dark and visible, her clothing slightly disheveled, but she carried herself with such quiet authority that several in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried a resonance that filled the entire room. I appreciate the opportunity to address these allegations. Judge Harrison blinked. Something about her tone was measured, professional, not at all what he expected from someone accused of trespass and assault. First, she began, I'd like to correct several factual inaccuracies in Officer Martinez's testimony. Her gaze swept slowly across the room, pausing on each person who had backed the officer's lies. According to his statement, I was trespassing on government property. In fact, I was walking on a public sidewalk approaching the main courthouse entrance at approximately 8:47 a.m. She turned slightly, directing her next words to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, I'm sure you're familiar with the Supreme Court's ruling in Hague versus Committee for Industrial Organization, which establishes that public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are considered traditional public forums, and that citizens have a constitutional right to be present. The stenographer's fingers froze for a moment, mid-typing. The prosecutor's frown deepened. This was no panicked, emotional outburst. This was a woman who clearly knew her law. Furthermore, Kesha continued, Officer Martinez claimed that I was carrying suspicious documents and suggested possible identity theft. I'd like to examine that claim. She nodded toward the evidence table where her papers had been gathered. Those documents are authentic legal materials, pending case files, judicial memoranda and official correspondence, all of which I have legitimate access to in my professional capacity. Professional capacity? Judge Harrison interrupted, eyebrows raised. And what profession would that be, miss? Kesha's lips curved into the faintest smile. Williams, she said evenly. Dr. Williams, and we'll get to my professional background shortly. A cold ripple went through Martinez. Something about this was very, very wrong. Your Honor, if I may continue, Kesha said, her voice smooth. Confident, the voice of someone who belonged in a courtroom. Officer Martinez testified that I used profanity and became verbally aggressive. I will invoke my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent regarding any statements I may have made during the alleged incident. She paused deliberately, letting the words settle. However, she continued, her tone hardening, any words I did speak were a direct response to being physically assaulted without provocation, warning or legal justification. In the back row, the young law clerk suddenly sat straighter. Something about Kesha's voice was triggering recognition. And regarding the so-called body cam malfunction, Kesha added, now with steel in her tone, Your Honor, under Federal Rule of Evidence 106, summaries of comprehensive records may be introduced into evidence. I have reason to believe that high-quality video and audio footage of this entire encounter exists and can be made available to this court. Judge Harrison leaned forward, suddenly attentive. What kind of evidence are you referring to? This courthouse, Kesha said evenly, has extensive security coverage, including high-definition cameras placed at 15-foot intervals along the approach to the entrance. Additionally, the county automatically backs up all body cam footage, regardless of claimed malfunctions. Martinez's face paled. He had completely forgotten about courthouse security footage. I formally request, Kesha said clearly, that this court issue a preservation order for all security footage, body cam backup files, and any recordings made by officers on their personal devices from 8:45 to 9:05 a.m. this morning. Prosecutor Walsh shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot simply demand evidence without proper legal counsel. Kesha turned toward her with a stare so sharp the prosecutor instinctively stepped back. Your Honor, Kesha said, her voice commanding, pro se defendants have a constitutional right to present evidence under the Sixth Amendment. Furthermore, Brady v. Maryland requires the state to preserve any potentially exculpatory evidence. The courtroom fell silent. This was not how these hearings normally went. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Miss Williams, you seem unusually well-versed in legal procedure. Do you have formal legal training? I have some experience with the judicial system, Kesha replied coolly. Her words were neutral, but her eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. She stepped toward the evidence table as far as the cuffs would allow. Finally, I'd like to address Officer Martinez's claim that my presence here was suspicious. She pointed to a document lying on the table. This is my official court calendar for today. which shows I was scheduled to appear in this building for official business beginning at 9 a.m. Bailiff Henderson, a man who had worked in the courthouse for over a decade, froze mid-breath. His eyes widened as he began to recognize who she really was. Keisha turned back toward the judge, her voice calm, but cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Officer Martinez testified that Officer Martinez claimed that I pretended to be someone important. Keisha continued, her voice even. I'd like to clarify that I never once claimed such a thing. What I did attempt to do was present my identification, which Officer Martinez refused to even look at before initiating his assault. She paused deliberately, scanning the courtroom as if weighing every face. Your Honor, despite the violent interference I endured this morning, I still have documentation that will conclusively establish both my identity and my lawful purpose for being here. Judge Harrison's discomfort was now visible. What kind of documentation, Miss Williams? Keisha slowly reached into her jacket pocket, every movement deliberate, calculated not to alarm anyone. My judicial parking pass issued by this courthouse, my building access card, and my official identification. The room seemed to freeze. Bailiff Henderson suddenly stiffened, his face draining of color. He had seen that card before. He had seen her before, every single day for the past 3 years. Your Honor, Keisha said quietly, her voice suddenly carrying the full weight of authority. I believe there's been a very serious misunderstanding about who exactly Officer Martinez assaulted this morning. She opened a small leather wallet and held it high enough for the entire room to see. The gold judicial seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Perhaps we should recess, she suggested coolly, so that my identification can be properly verified. Judge Harrison's eyes flicked from the badge to her face, then to Henderson, who gave a slow, grim nod. This court will recess for 15 minutes, Harrison said, his voice hoarse as he slammed the gavel. For the first time since the morning began, Martinez felt the ground shift beneath him. His confidence cracked. During the recess, the courthouse hummed with tension. In a small holding room, Keisha sat calmly on the bench, as if she had all the time in the world. Bailiff Henderson stood by, fumbling with his keyring, his hands trembling. Judge Williams, he whispered, his voice thick. Oh, God, Judge Williams, I didn't recognize you in plain clothes when they dragged you in like that. It's all right, Henderson, Keisha said softly, but her voice carried a razor edge. You weren't part of this. But now I need you to do something for me. Anything, Your Honor, Henderson said immediately. Go to my chambers quietly. Bring me my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim. And Henderson? She fixed him with a steady look. Bring me my gavel, the engraved one from my swearing-in. Henderson nodded hard and rushed out, leaving Keisha alone. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, centering herself the way she had learned over 23 years on the bench. That morning, she had walked these steps as Judge Keisha Williams, respected jurist, guardian of justice. Within minutes, she had been reduced to a defendant in handcuffs, humiliated in front of the very courthouse where she had spent her career defending rights and upholding law. But now it was time to reclaim what was hers. Her confiscated phone, now returned, buzzed with missed calls and urgent messages. Her clerk, Janet Morrison, had sent a series of frantic texts. Judge Williams, where are you? The Peterson hearing is in 30 minutes. The attorneys are asking about delays. Your Honor, please call me. There are rumors something happened. Keisha typed back with cold precision. Tell the Peterson attorneys the hearing will be rescheduled. Clear my entire afternoon calendar. Then she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she wanted. Margaret, she said as soon as the line connected. Keisha! Thank God, we heard there was some kind of incident. Are you okay? I've been better, Keisha replied, her voice calm but hard as steel. Margaret, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it right now. No questions. Of course. Whatever you need. Contact courthouse security and have them immediately preserve and duplicate all surveillance footage from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15. All cameras, all angles. And make sure copies are stored in multiple secure locations. There was a long silence on the other end. Kesha, what exactly happened this morning? Kesha's voice sharpened. A police officer named Martinez just spent nearly an hour testifying under oath about how he heroically subdued a dangerous criminal who was trespassing on courthouse property. She paused for just a moment before delivering the blow. And that so-called dangerous criminal was me, Margaret. On my way to work, he assaulted me in front of this building, called me a filthy animal, told me I belonged in a cage. There was dead silence. Then Margaret's voice, low and dangerous. Jesus Christ. Kesha, do you want me to call the FBI? The Attorney General's office? Not yet, Kesha said evenly. First, I need those recordings secured. Then I need every case Officer Martinez has testified in over the past 5 years, pulled and reviewed. Every single one. Consider it done. But Kesha, you can't preside over this case. It's a conflict of interest. Kesha's lips curved into a cold, thin smile. In 10 minutes, Margaret, I'm going to walk back into that courtroom wearing my judicial robes. Officer Martinez is going to find out exactly who he assaulted this morning and who has the authority to ensure that he answers for it. Henderson returned, breathing hard, holding a garment bag and a small wooden box. Your robes, Your Honor, and your gavel. Kesha unzipped the garment bag, revealing the flowing black robes with their gold trim. As she slipped them on, she felt the weight of authority settle on her shoulders like a mantle. For 23 years, these robes had been her armor. Today, they would be her weapon. She opened the wooden box and removed her ceremonial gavel, the smooth wood gleaming. On the handle were engraved the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." "Henderson," Kesha said, adjusting the robe's collar until it sat perfectly. "When we go back in, I want you to announce me properly." Henderson nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Honor." "How would you like to be announced?" Kesha Williams straightened to her full height, her presence filling the room. "Announce me," she said quietly, "as what I have always been, Judge Kesha Williams, presiding." Henderson's voice rang through the courtroom, deep and commanding. "All rise! The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams, presiding." Kesha took one last glance in the small mirror on the wall before stepping out. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but now it had become something else. No longer just evidence of Martinez's assault, but a symbol, a warning, a promise that the system was about to be corrected. She stepped through the chamber door. The courtroom froze. Her black judicial robes, with the gold trim, shimmered under the overhead. Lights as she moved with slow, deliberate steps, the steps of someone who had walked this path thousands of times, but never with stakes this high. In her right hand, she carried her engraved gavel, the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all," catching the light. No one moved, no one breathed. Judge Harrison, still sitting where he now realized he did not belong, turned pale. The prosecutor's mouth fell open, and Officer Martinez went stiff as a statue, every ounce of color draining from his face. Kesha ascended the bench, and sat, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes swept the courtroom, pausing on every face, letting them feel the weight of what was happening. "Officer Martinez," she said at last, her voice like ice, "you may remain standing." Martinez looked like he might collapse. Judge Harrison stammered from the side, Your Honor, I didn't know." Kesha raised a hand, silencing him with nothing more than a glance. "Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay," she said evenly. "You may return to your own docket. I will handle this matter from here." Harrison didn't wait to be told twice. He practically bolted from the room, his robes flying behind him. Kesha turned back to Martinez, her expression unreadable. "Officer Martinez," she said softly, "approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony?" Martinez couldn't form words. "Let me refresh your memory," Kesha said, her tone sharpening. "You stated, and I quote, 'These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, you senators, anything to avoid accountability.'" Martinez swallowed hard, his throat working. "You also said I was, quote, 'another entitled activist looking for a payday, and that you'd seen this playbook before.'" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, and perhaps most memorably, "You stated that people like me need to learn that, quote, 'Makin yandakchadzangi kro. Actions have consequences.'" Martinez's legs began to tremble so violently he could barely stand. Kesha reached under the bench and lifted a tablet. "I'd like to show you some evidence that has just come to my attention." She turned the tablet toward the courtroom and tapped the screen. Security camera footage filled the display, crystal clear. Multiple angles. The entire room watched as the video played, Kesha walking toward the courthouse, Martinez stepping into her path. The words he had used, words that now filled the room through the tablet speakers, cutting through the silence. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in." Gasps erupted in the gallery. The footage continued. Martinez's slap that sent Kesha's head snapping to the side, his hands on her throat, the cuffs clicking shut, and then the most damning moment of all. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages." The words echoed in the courtroom like a gunshot. Several spectators stood and left in disgust. Others just stared, horrified. "Officer Martinez," Kesha said, pausing the video, "do you see any verbal aggression from me in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats of violence?" Martinez didn't answer. Couldn't answer. "Now," Kesha said, swiping to a new file, "let's review your claim that your body cam malfunctioned." A second video began to play. This one from Martinez's own body cam, automatically backed up to the county cloud server. His voice snarled through the speakers, unedited and unmistakable. "Look at this uppity one. Thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. Time to teach another lesson." The prosecutor scrambled to gather her files, clearly desperate to distance herself from the disaster unraveling in front of her. But Kesha wasn't done. "Officers Rodriguez, Thompson," she said, her eyes cutting to the back of the courtroom. "You both testified under oath that Officer Martinez handled this situation with professionalism. Would you like to revise those statements?" Neither officer spoke. Both were already edging toward the door. Kesha advanced the video to the exact moment of the assault, now from Martinez's body cam perspective. "Here," she said, her voice quiet but deadly. "We see the moment Officer Martinez committed felony assault against a federal judge." She let the words hang in the air. Federal judge. Martinez's knees buckled. He gripped the prosecutor's table for support, but Kesha still wasn't finished. "This," she said, pulling up yet another file, "is audio from Officer Thompson's body cam." New voices filled the room, Thompson and Rodriguez speaking casually while Martinez was assaulting her. "Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying? Nah, man. Look at her. Martinez knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system." Laughter. Laughter as a federal judge was being brutalized on the courthouse steps. The last few spectators who had remained in the gallery sat frozen, glaring at Martinez with open disgust. Kesha slowly set the tablet down. "You asked earlier if I had any employment verification," she said, her voice like tempered steel. "Well, I do." She gestured toward the gold judicial seal mounted behind her bench, toward the nameplate in front of her, toward the official oil portrait of her hanging in the courthouse lobby. "I have been the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. Officer Martinez, Her voice grew even colder. "And every case you've ever testified in. Every warrant you've ever requested." She let the weight of that unfinished sentence hang in the air, a promise of what was coming next. "Every search you've ever conducted in this jurisdiction," Judge Williams said, her voice quiet but razor-sharp, "was done under my authority." Martinez finally found his voice, but it was barely more than a whisper. "Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't know," Kesha repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "No, Officer Martinez. You didn't know because you didn't bother to look. You saw a black woman and made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, and you decided to abuse that power." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "But there's something else you didn't know." The entire courtroom went still, as though holding a collective breath. "For the last 6 months," Kesha continued, her tone turning lethal, "I've been working directly with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, investigating systemic misconduct and racial bias in this very police department." The color drained completely from Martinez's face. "This morning's incident wasn't random, Officer Martinez. You've been under investigation, and today you handed us the single most compelling piece of evidence we could have possibly hoped for." She lifted her gavel, the gold lettering catching the light. "You were right about one thing. Officer Martinez, actions do have consequences." The gavel came down with a sound that cracked like thunder. Martinez collapsed into the nearest chair, his career, his reputation, and very likely his freedom now hanging by a thread. When court reconvened 20 minutes later, the atmosphere was completely transformed. Word had spread through the courthouse like wildfire, whispers of a reversal so unprecedented that no one wanted to miss it. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, even off-duty officers quietly slipped into the gallery until every seat was filled. This was no longer just a hearing, it was history. Martinez now sat slumped in what was clearly the defendant's chair. His uniform was wrinkled, his badge slightly crooked, his face pale and glistening with sweat. A nervous public defender, Michael Carter, had been hastily summoned to represent him and kept shooting anxious glances at his client, as if trying to calculate the damage control needed to save what little remained of Martinez's future. Judge Kesha Williams entered the courtroom again, her robe perfectly settled, her expression calm but unreadable. Every eye followed her as she took her place on the bench. The respect and fear in the room was palpable. "Officer Martinez," she began, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of authority, "before we proceed with the serious criminal charges now pending against you, this court and everyone present deserves to know exactly who you assaulted this morning." She rose from behind the bench and walked to the center of the courtroom, standing tall before the packed gallery. "My name is Judge Kesha Williams. I have served as the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. I was appointed to this bench by Governor Richardson in 2001 and confirmed unanimously by the state Senate." Her voice grew stronger, every word deliberate. "I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I served as editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before my appointment to the bench, I spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, where I specialized in prosecuting cases of police misconduct, civil rights violations, and institutional corruption. I personally secured convictions in 47 such cases against law enforcement officers who abused their power." Martinez's attorney froze mid-scribble, his pen hovering uselessly over his notepad as he realized the depth of the disaster. "In my 23 years on this bench," Kesha continued, "I have presided over more than 15,000 cases, from petty theft to capital murder. I have seen every excuse, every justification, every manipulation imaginable." She turned her gaze back to Martinez, who sat slouched, unable to meet her eyes. "But in all my years of service," Kesha said, her voice growing colder. "I have never witnessed such a perfect, textbook example of everything broken in modern policing as what you did to me this morning." The courtroom was silent, except for the faint, uneven sound of Martinez's breathing. "When you called me a ghetto rat and a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse." She returned to her bench, standing tall behind it. "You were not assaulting some nameless citizen. You were assaulting the very system you swore to uphold. You were assaulting the judge who has dedicated her life to making sure officers like you are held accountable." Kesha opened a thick folder that had been placed on her bench and flipped through the pages. "This file contains the detailed record of every single case you've testified in over the past 5 years. 43 cases. 28 of those defendants were people of color. In 26 of those cases, you were the arresting officer, and in every single one, Officer Martinez, your language, your narrative, your accusations were identical. Acting erratically, refusing to comply, becoming aggressive, posing a threat to officer safety." The same script, over and over again. Martinez looked like he might vomit. "But here's what you really didn't know," Kesha said, closing the file with a sharp snap. "For the last 6 months, I have been working with the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and the Department of Justice to investigate systemic racial bias and misconduct in this department. Your name has been on a federal watch list for months. Your communications have been monitored. Your arrest. Reports have been analyzed. And this morning, Officer Martinez, you gave us the most clear, unambiguous, irrefutable evidence of civil rights violations any prosecutor could ever hope for." Her hand closed around the gavel again. "You assaulted a federal judge in the performance of her duties, motivated by racial animus, and then you perjured yourself under oath to cover it up." The gavel hovered in the air for a long moment. "You asked me this morning if I knew my place," Kesha said, her voice rising just enough to fill every corner of the room. "Well, let me tell you my place, Officer Martinez. My place is right. Here, on this bench, ensuring that justice is served. My place is making sure that officers who abuse their power are stripped of that power. My place is guaranteeing that what you did to me this morning is the last act of violence you will ever commit wearing a badge." The gavel came down with a resounding crack. Martinez finally understood. He hadn't just attacked a woman. He had attacked justice itself, and now justice was coming for him. Kesha opened another thick manila folder and fixed Martinez with a cold stare. "Officer Martinez," she said evenly, "let's take a closer look at your so-called distinguished career." Martinez's attorney leaned in, whispering frantically to his client, as if trying to prepare him for what was about to come. But judging from the look on his face, he already knew it was too late. Martinez's attorney leaned close, whispering urgently in his client's ear, but Martinez just stared ahead, motionless, as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "According to Internal Affairs," Judge Williams said, her voice measured but deadly, "you've been the subject of 47 formal complaints during your 15-year career. 47, Officer Martinez. That's more than 3 complaints every single year." She lifted a document and held it up for the record. "Let's start with complaint number 1, filed in 2009. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, a 63-year-old grandmother, alleged that during a routine traffic stop, you called her a racial slur and slammed her face against the hood of her car after she asked for your badge number." The courtroom stirred uneasily. "Your department investigated that complaint and, surprise, found it unsubstantiated. Interesting, considering that today we have video evidence of you using nearly identical language and tactics." She flipped to the next page with a crisp snap. Complaint number 12, 2012, Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student, alleged that you planted drugs in his backpack after he refused to give you information about his older brother. Unsubstantiated. Martinez's breathing had grown heavier, more erratic. Complaint number 23. 2016, Dr. Michael Johnson. Yes, Dr. Johnson, a cardiologist at St. Luke's. Idril alleged that you arrested him outside his own home because you didn't believe a black man could live there. Dr. Johnson spent 6 hours in jail before his attorney secured his release. And the department's finding on that one? Martinez barely managed to croak out, unsubstantiated. Correct, Judge Williams said coolly. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Chief Judge Margaret Carter, who had slipped quietly into the gallery, sat forward in her seat, taking notes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Judge Williams continued, I cross-referenced your complaint record with your arrest statistics, and the results are damning. She placed a large chart on an easel for everyone to see. Over your 15-year career, you've made 1,251 arrests. Of those arrests, 1,089, that's 87%, were people of color. Yet the demographics of your patrol area are 42% white, 31% Hispanic, and 27% black. She pointed to the chart with a laser pointer, each statistic landing like a hammer blow. Your use of force reports show you employed physical force in 63% of arrests involving people of color. In contrast, your use of force against white suspects? 12%. Martinez's attorney was scribbling furiously, as though already preparing for an inevitable federal indictment. And perhaps the most damning statistic of all, Judge Williams said, of your 189 arrests of people of color, 432 cases were dismissed. Dismissed due to lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or constitutional violations. That's a dismissal rate of nearly 40%. She turned back to Martinez. Do you know what we call a 40% dismissal rate due to constitutional violations, Officer Martinez? We call that a pattern of criminal behavior. The courtroom was so silent that the scratching of reporters' pens was deafening. But wait, Judge Williams said, her tone almost conversational now. There's more. She pulled out another report. Over the past 15 years, this county has paid out $2.3 million, 2.3 million taxpayer dollars in settlements and judgments related to your conduct. That's more than the entire annual budget of some small towns. Martinez finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and weak. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job? Judge Williams repeated, her tone icy. Let's review exactly what your job is. She held up a copy of his sworn oath. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of my office to the best of my ability. So help me God. She set the document down, faithfully and impartially. Officer Martinez, not selectively, not based on skin color, and certainly not based on personal prejudice. Judge Williams stepped out from behind the bench, turning to address the packed courtroom. What we are seeing here is not just the misconduct of a single rogue officer. This is the inevitable result of a system designed to protect officers like Martinez, to dismiss complaint after complaint, to quietly settle lawsuit after lawsuit, all while allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. She turned back to Martinez. But that system failed you today, didn't it, Officer Martinez? Because today you assaulted someone with the power to expose everything. Martinez's head dropped into his hands. You told this court that people like me need to know our place. Well, Officer Martinez, I think it's time you learned yours. She returned to her bench and raised her gavel. Your place is no longer on the streets with a badge and a gun. Your place is in the defendant's chair, facing the full weight of the law for 15 years of misconduct. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. And that, Judge Williams said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, is exactly where you're going to stay. She stood tall, her black judicial robe flowing around her like battle armor. Before I render judgment, she said, I want to address not just this defendant, but everyone in this room, and everyone who will hear of what happened here today. Her gaze swept across the gallery, past lawyers, clerks, reporters, and citizens leaning forward in rapt attention. This morning began with a simple question. What happens when someone with a badge believes they are above the law? What happens when years of unchecked power convince someone they can assault a federal judge without consequence? She turned back to Martinez, whose career and life were unraveling in real time. The answer, Officer Martinez, she said, lifting her gavel one final time, is standing right in front of you. Her voice grew stronger, filled with righteous fire. For 15 years, you terrorized this community. For 15 years, you violated the constitutional rights of citizens whose only crime was existing, while black or brown. For 15 years, you made a mockery of the badge you swore to honor. She took a breath, her next words cutting like a blade. But your greatest mistake was not any single act of brutality. Your greatest mistake was believing the system would protect you forever, believing you were untouchable, believing there would never be a day of reckoning. The gavel hovered high in the air. Well, Officer Martinez, that day has come. The gavel came down like a gunshot, echoing through the silent courtroom. This morning, Judge Williams said, her voice steady, when you called me a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, when you paraded me through these halls in handcuffs like a criminal, you believed you were asserting dominance over yet another powerless victim. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing the entire courtroom to strain to hear. But I was never powerless, Officer Martinez, and neither were any of the people you brutalized over the years. The difference is that today, justice finally had a witness. She rose to her full height, her black robe flowing like battle armor. Officer Martinez, based on the evidence presented, your own words, your own actions, your own camera, I find you guilty of assault in the first degree, a felony. The words cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. I find you guilty of assault on a judicial officer, a federal felony with a mandatory minimum of 5 years. Martinez's attorney shut his eyes, shoulders slumping in defeat. I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Martinez seemed to shrink into his chair with every word. And finally, Judge Williams said, her voice like steel, I find you guilty of perjury in the first degree for lying under oath in this very courtroom. She let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. But make no mistake, this case was never just about you, Officer Martinez. You are a symptom of a disease that has infected our justice system for far too long. She turned to face the packed gallery, her voice growing stronger, reaching every corner of the room. For too long, police officers have been allowed to act with impunity. For too long, complaints have been dismissed, evidence ignored, and taxpayers forced to foot the bill while abuse continued. For too long, victims were told their word didn't count, that justice wasn't meant for them. Her voice rose, ringing with righteous fury. But that ends today. What happened in this courtroom proves that no one is above the law. Not police officers, not prosecutors, not judges, not politicians, no one. Martinez finally broke, sobbing uncontrollably, his voice cracking as he choked out, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I never meant. Judge Williams looked down at him, her face unreadable. Your apology is 15 years and 47 complaints too late. Your remorse exists only because today you face someone with the power to hold you accountable. She lifted her gavel high. But before you leave this courtroom for the last time as a free man, I want you to hear this. Every grandmother you cursed, every teenager you framed, every doctor you humiliated, every life you shattered, they all deserve this moment. The gavel hovered in the air like an executioner's blade. Today I am not just delivering justice for myself. I am delivering justice for every person whose complaint was stamped unsubstantiated, for every family who buried a loved one without answers, for every citizen who was told their pain didn't matter. Officer Martinez, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, here it is. Her voice boomed like a verdict from the heavens. My place is here, ensuring that bullies like you will never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Officer Martinez, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Martinez collapsed, his sobs shaking his entire body as deputies moved toward him. And furthermore, Judge Williams said, her voice calm but resolute, I am ordering a full federal review of every case you touched, every arrest you made, and every complaint filed against you. The victims you silenced for 15 years will finally have their day in court. She set her gavel down, then looked out over the gallery. Let this be a message to every officer, prosecutor, and public official who believes they can abuse their power without consequence. Justice may be blind, but she sees everything, and she will come for you. The courtroom erupted in applause, a wave of sound that lasted 5 full minutes. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that day were still being felt across the state. Reforms had been passed, bad officers removed, and dozens of wrongfully convicted citizens had their cases overturned. And Officer Martinez? He was now 6 months into his 25-year federal sentence, his badge stripped away, his crimes broadcast on every major network. Justice had not just been served, it had been seen. Martinez's badge, his pension, his freedom, all gone. The man who once terrorized an entire community now spent his days in protective custody and finally experiencing what it truly meant to be powerless. But Martinez's fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The federal investigation, ordered by Judge Williams, uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far beyond one. 12 officers were fired. 4 supervisors faced criminal charges. The entire police department was placed under strict federal oversight. Chief Judge Margaret Carter introduced sweeping reforms. Automatic federal review for any case involving alleged police misconduct, mandatory body cameras with tamper-proof backup systems, and transparent reporting requirements the public could access. Most importantly, the 432 cases tainted by Martinez were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted people walked out of prison free. Hundreds more had their charges dropped or their sentences reduced. The county paid $8.7 million in compensation to Martinez's victims directly out of the police department's budget. For the first time, the cost of injustice was borne by the institution that caused it. Judge Williams became a national symbol of courage and judicial integrity. She spoke at law schools across the country, reminding the next generation of lawyers and judges that justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. The courthouse where it all happened was renamed the Justice Williams Federal Courthouse. Bronze plaque near the entrance reads simply, "Here, justice finally found its voice." But the most powerful change wasn't in the laws, and it was in the community. Citizens who had once been too afraid to speak out now came forward to report abuse. Community oversight boards were created. Police training was completely overhauled, with Judge Williams herself helping design new courses in constitutional rights and unconscious bias. The young law clerk who had witnessed the trial was so inspired that she went on to become a civil rights attorney for the ACLU, fighting similar battles nationwide. As for Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, the men who laughed while watching a federal judge being brutalized, they were fired, charged and ultimately convicted of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Their case is now taught at police academies as a cautionary tale of institutional corruption. And the video of Judge Williams delivering her historic verdict, it became the most watched courtroom clip in internet history, over 50 million views and counting, a symbol of what accountability can look like. Today, Officer Martinez sits in a federal prison cell, staring at the same 4 concrete walls every day, probably replaying that moment when he thought he could break a woman because she wore a robe instead of a badge. Thought he knew his place. He thought he knew hers. He was wrong on both counts, because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears judicial robes. Sometimes justice carries a gavel, and when the moment is right, or justice hits back, never underestimate the power of standing up to bullies.